Welcome to So Much Fun. I'm Colleen Murphy and I teach sewing. Recently, some of my students have made a request for me to show you how to make a receiving blanket. You know, from periodically people get invitations for baby showers and they want to take something, but making a quilt will take too much time for them to complete it. So a receiving blanket is a really nice option. It doesn't take very long. I would say probably within an hour you can finish it from beginning to end. And here's an example of one that shows you that it's just two pieces of fabric and there really isn't any piecing involved. Very, very simple. I've already cut the fabric and you can tell that one piece is larger than the other. So the difference is 10 inches. So the outer fabric was cut at 43 inches. The inner fabric was cut at 33 inches. Your first step will be to find the center point for each side, and you place a pin at the center point, both for the smaller fabric and also for the larger fabric, because you want to match those center points, put them together so that you can sew one side at a time. And actually I already have one side pinned ready to stitch. I recommend doing a 1/2 inch seam, and also we want to make sure that we do not sew the entire length, that we leave a 1/2 inch on each end of the seam for our mitered corner. Now before I take it to the sewing machine, I want to point out a little trick that I use. I like to use soap to do my marking on fabric. So right at this point, which is a 1/2 inch from the edge, I took a piece of soap and I just made a mark, all right? And that way you don't have to worry about any residue or anything with using soap versus some of your fabric markers. They might say they're erasable, but sometimes they don't erase completely. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam and stop 1/2 inch from each end. All right, I've sewn the first side and I used a 1/2 inch seam, and I've also pressed that seam open. Now I've taken the fabric and I've brought the fabric over to the opposite side. And I want you to be able to see that I have matched my center pins so that the center of the smaller fabric matches up with the center of the larger fabric. Just as I did for the first side, I'm going to repeat that on the opposite side. So now I'm going to take a moment to pin, mark 1/2 inch from each end because I don't want to sew that completely closed there. And then I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew that 1/2 inch seam. Now I have sewn the second seam and pressed the seam open, and I'm ready to do the third side. And when you look at it, you think, I don't see how in the world this is all going to work, but it will. We're going to be matching up the pin that marks the center of the smaller square to the pin of the larger square. And in doing that, it's not going to be lying flat. And in case I forgot to mention, I think though, if you're a sewer, you know that you want pretty side to pretty side. So at this time, I'm going to take my two pieces of fabric where the pins are and bring them together and pin the seam and do the same thing that I did with the first two sides. I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch on each end that's necessary in order to be able to do the mitered corner. So I'll be back after I finish sewing the seam and pressing the seam open. All right, now we're ready to sew the last side. But before we do, you want to be sure to mark your fabric to leave an opening. And I leave about a fist wide opening. So when we finish, we'll be able to pull the fabric right side out. very important, do not sew the last side without leaving an opening. You must have the opening in order to turn the blanket inside out, right side out. Before we turn the blanket right side out, we want to do our mitered corners. So at each corner, you're going to adjust your fabric so you'll have like 2.5 inches from your stitching to the fold. Make sure that you measure on each side. You're doing one corner at a time. So starting here at the first corner, I will draw a line. I already have drawn the line, but just to show you, from where my stitches stopped, which should be 1/2 inch, from the end of the smaller fabric, we stop 1/2 inch from there on every seam. So when we pull that back, I'm going to place my ruler right where that is, and then I'm going to bring it out to the point where the corner is. And then I just drew a line. That's all I did. And I made sure then when I pinned that so you can see right here that I went through both layers of fabric to mark it. Now once that line is drawn, this is what it'll be after you sew it. So I've got my stitches from, again, the point, 1/2 inch from the edge, all the way to the corner. And once that's done, then you will want to press you want to trim. You want to trim this off, and notice that I trimmed at an angle. This is the outer corner. I trimmed that at an angle, like a 45-degree angle. And then over here at this point, I haven't done the trimming yet. I'm just going to kind of open this up so you can see we got a lot of fabric here and we want to get rid of this bulk. So I want this out, and now I'm going to cut right where the stitches end at a 45-degree angle away from it there. And get my scissors to work. Cut that. You probably can see better here. But we want to cut all this away before we go to press it at the ironing station. Well, we just want to get rid of this bulk is what we want to do. I'm going to trim it there and back this way. And then I got the blue fabric. So I trim them separate. I don't trim them together. I'm just kind of cutting out that corner like that. Looks a little messy, but you just keep working with it until, I see I need to do some more. So I'm going to trim back again, trying to reduce the bulk. And I'm cutting like approximately 1/4 inch because I want all that bulk to be out of there. All right, so when we get finished, and when you go to press, that will all be flat, all right? So those are the steps that it takes to make your mitered corners. All right, I have turned it right side out and pressed, but at the opening, I want to point out the fact that I cut the outer fabric into where the stitches were in order for that to be underneath the center fabric, so that when you do your stitching, you'll be sure to catch both fabrics. So your last step essentially is doing some type of decorative stitch all the way around, right where your border, your outer fabric, and your inner fabric are seamed. And that's your choice. I like to do kind of a wavy zigzag on mine, but that doesn't mean you would want to do that. With the machines that we have today, they have so many decorative stitches on them. This is your time to use one of them, because it's not very often that we have an occasion to use our decorative stitches. But that's the very last thing you have to do, is to do a stitch of some type, not just a straight stitch. I would use some kind of decorative stitch and go all the way around. And you're done. I hope you will try making a receiving blanket and see that it really doesn't take that much time. Please like and subscribe and have so much fun.